Hello friends, please like and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the stories. Chapter 1. The Train to Nowhere. The train rattled along the tracks, cutting through the frozen wilderness like a silver needle threading its way through the fabric of time. Asha pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching as snowflakes danced under the dim glow of the carriage lights. The world outside was a blur of white and shadow, an endless expanse of frost-covered trees stretching toward oblivion. She had never planned on taking this journey. The ticket had been a last-minute impulse, bought in a moment of reckless defiance. London had become suffocating, its streets cluttered with memories she no longer wanted to carry. This train, bound for the northernmost edges of Scotland, had seemed like an escape, a one-way ticket to nowhere. "Do you mind if I sit here?" The voice was deep, steady, with a slight rasp, like the wind scraping against ice. Asha turned, startled out of her reverie. A man stood before her, his dark eyes reflecting the glow of the overhead lights. He had tousled brown hair, a sharp jawline, and an air of quiet intensity that made her stomach tighten unexpectedly. "Go ahead," she murmured, shifting to make room. He sat across from her, placing a leather duffel bag at his feet. His coat was dusted with snow, and when he ran a hand through his hair, tiny flakes melted against his skin. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic clatter of the train and the occasional murmur of distant passengers. "Going far?" he asked at last. Asha hesitated. "I don't know yet." He studied her with quiet curiosity. "That's an interesting answer." She gave a half smile. "And you?" His lips quirked slightly. "Same." A strange silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something unspoken. Asha was used to solitude, to the quiet ache of it. But this man, this stranger, made the loneliness feel different. Less like an absence, more like a possibility. "I'm Leo," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Asha." She took it, surprised by the warmth of his touch despite the cold. For hours, they spoke in hushed voices, their words blending with the hum of the train. He told her about his childhood in Edinburgh, his love for the sea, the way he always carried a book but never finished reading it. She told him about the city she had left behind, the dreams she had once chased but had since abandoned. "Sometimes," Leo said, gazing out the window, "I think people like us are just meant to keep moving." Asha studied his profile, the way the dim light traced the contours of his face. "And what happens when we stop?" His eyes met hers, and something in his expression shifted, like a tide pulling away from shore. "Maybe we don't." The train screeched to a sudden halt. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the carriage into near darkness. A murmur of confusion rippled through the passengers. Asha's pulse quickened. "What just happened?" Leo reached for his bag. "I think," he said slowly, "we've arrived." "But we're in the middle of nowhere," Asha whispered. A faint smile ghosted his lips. "Exactly." And as the doors slid open, revealing not a station but an endless expanse of untouched snow under a sky too vast to comprehend, Asha realized this journey had never been about the destination, it had always been about the company. And perhaps, just perhaps, about finally choosing to stay. Chapter 2. Footprints in the Snow. Asha hesitated at the open door of the train, cold air biting at her cheeks. Beyond the threshold stretched an endless, untouched landscape of snow. No station, no platform, no signs of civilization. Just the vast, moonlit wilderness, as if the world itself had been erased and redrawn in silver and white. Leo stood beside her, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Are you coming?" She turned to him, half expecting an explanation, a reassurance that this was some strange but logical detour. Instead, he simply looked at her with that same quiet certainty, as if he had known all along that they would end up here. "Where even is here?" she asked. Leo smirked. "That's the fun part, isn't it?" Before she could respond, he stepped off the train. His boots sank into the fresh snow with a muffled crunch, leaving the first footprints in an otherwise untouched expanse. He turned back, offering his hand. Asha's fingers hovered near his. A voice inside her whispered that this was reckless, absurd. But another, deeper instinct stirred, one that craved something unplanned, something untethered from the life she had abandoned. She took his hand. The moment her foot left the train and touched the snow, the doors slid shut behind her with a mechanical hiss. Asha spun around just in time to see the train lurch forward, its lights flickering briefly as it disappeared into the darkness. Her breath caught. Wait! But it was gone. No tracks remained in the snow, no lingering sound of wheels against rails. As if the train had never been there at all, a chill ran deeper than the cold. What just happened? Leo squeezed her hand gently. We're here now. Asha pulled away, heart pounding. And where is here? He exhaled, his breath fogging the air. A place between places. She stared at him. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Frustration mixed with unease. This had been a mistake. She should have stayed on the train. Should have. And then she saw it. A single light in the distance, flickering like a beacon. A warm glow amidst the endless cold. See that? Leo asked, nodding toward it. Asha swallowed hard. Yeah. Then let's go. The wind howled softly as they trudged through the snow, their footprints the only evidence of their passage. The light, distant but steady, became their guide. Asha glanced at Leo. You don't seem surprised by any of this. He gave a half smile. Maybe I've been here before. How is that possible? He didn't answer. The air grew thicker as they approached the light, something intangible pressing against Asha's skin like an unseen current. And then, through the veil of falling snow, a shape emerged. A small wooden cabin, its windows glowing golden, smoke curling lazily from a chimney. Asha slowed. This place was never on the map, was it? Leo stopped beside her. No. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Then what is it? He turned to her, his dark eyes unreadable. A question with more answers than we have time for. And as he stepped forward, pushing open the door, a strange warmth enveloped her, welcoming, unfamiliar, and laced with the eerie certainty that nothing after this night would ever be the same. Chapter 3. The Cabin of Forgotten Things. The door creaked open, spilling warm golden light onto the snow-covered ground. Asha hesitated on the threshold, every instinct telling her to turn back. But where would she even go? The train was gone, the world behind them erased by darkness. And Leo had already stepped inside. A gust of warmth brushed against her skin, carrying the scent of burning wood, something sweet, like vanilla and cinnamon, and a faint, almost imperceptible trace of salt, like the sea. She crossed the threshold. The inside of the cabin was nothing like she expected. The walls were lined with bookshelves, stretching impossibly high, filled with old, weathered tomes. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden floors. A heavy wooden table stood in the center of the room, cluttered with objects. Old pocket watches, rusted keys, folded letters sealed with wax, and other strange trinkets. It felt familiar. Leo shrugged off his coat, tossing it onto a chair. Make yourself at home. Asha frowned. Whose home is this? Leo ran his fingers along the spines of the books, his gaze distant. It belongs to the ones who remember, and the ones who forget. Asha exhaled sharply. You keep talking in riddles. He finally turned to face her. And yet you're still here. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She walked toward the table, drawn to the strange assortment of objects. Her fingers brushed over an old locket, its silver surface tarnished. Something about it tugged at the edges of her mind. She picked it up, the metal cool against her palm. Careful, Leo murmured. She glanced at him. Why? Because once you touch something here, it remembers you. Asha hesitated, then slowly opened the locket. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a girl standing at the edge of a train platform. Her face was turned away, her dark hair flowing in the wind. Asha's breath caught. She knew this place. A memory surfaced, fleeting, hazy. A platform. A train she never boarded. A choice she had forgotten she made. Her voice was barely a whisper. What is this place? Leo watched her carefully. A crossroads. For what? For the things people leave behind. A cold realization settled over her. And the people? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to a small wooden cabinet in the corner and opened it, revealing a row of coats, scarves, and shoes, belonging to people who weren't here. Asha's heartbeat quickened. Are we trapped? Leo's expression was unreadable. That depends. On what? On whether you want to remember or forget. The fire crackled, the shadows in the room deepening. The train was never coming back, and Asha wasn't sure if she wanted it to. Chapter 4. The Choice That Wasn't. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth failing to chase away the cold settling in Asha's bones. She turned the locket over in her fingers, its weight suddenly unbearable. A crossroads. A place for forgotten things. But what did that mean for her? She set the locket down, carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. You keep saying this place is for things left behind. What if I don't want to be here? Leo leaned against the table, arms crossed. Then you leave. Asha narrowed her eyes. Just like that? Just like that. But the train is gone, she shot back. Leo nodded, as if she was finally catching on. Exactly. Her stomach twisted. So how do I leave? Leo studied her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. You don't remember, do you? Remember what? He exhaled slowly, then walked toward one of the bookshelves. He ran his fingers along the spine, stopping at a faded red book. Pulling it free, he turned back to her. Here, he said, handing it to her. Asha hesitated before taking it. The cover was blank, the leather worn soft with age. When she opened it, the pages were filled with writing, her handwriting. Her throat went dry. She flipped through, skimming the words. Some passages were familiar, like echoes of dreams she had once had. Others were completely foreign, yet they felt as if she had lived them but forgotten. Then she reached the last page. A single sentence stared back at her, written in ink that looked too fresh. You already made your choice. Her breath caught. What does this mean? Leo's gaze softened. You've been here before, Asha, and every time you choose to forget. The room spun. That's not possible. But deep down, something in her knew he was telling the truth. The train, the platform, the locket. The overwhelming feeling that she had been here, had done this before. She looked at Leo, panic rising in her chest. Then why don't I remember? Because remembering means knowing why you came here in the first place. His voice was quiet, careful, and that's the part you don't want to face. Asha clenched her fists. Tell me. Leo hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled train ticket. He held it out to her. She took it, smoothing it out with trembling fingers. Her name was printed at the top. The date was yesterday. The destination was blank, and stamped across the bottom in bold, unshakable ink were 3 words that sent ice through her veins. One way only. Asha's pulse pounded in her ears. Did I die? She whispered. Leo didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fire crackled, the shadows stretched, and for the first time, Asha wasn't sure if she wanted to remember at all. Chapter 5. The Door That Wasn't There. Asha's fingers tightened around the ticket, the paper crinkling in her grip. The words, one way only, burned into her vision, their meaning sinking deeper with every breath. She forced herself to meet Leo's gaze. If this is true, if I already made my choice, then why am I still here? Leo exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Because there's always a moment before the final step. A moment where you decide whether to keep going or turn back. Asha's throat tightened. And what happens if I turn back? His expression darkened. No one ever has. The fire flickered violently, as if the cabin itself had reacted to his words. A gust of wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. The warmth in the room began to feel suffocating, pressing against her skin like something unseen was watching, waiting. Asha shook her head. No, this doesn't make sense. If I've been here before, then I should remember how it ends. You don't remember because you chose not to, Leo said softly. And once you forget, you start over. The train, the locket, the book, it's always the same, until you decide to see it through. Her pulse roared in her ears. She turned back to the table, staring at the scattered trinkets. Each one belonged to someone, to a life abandoned. A fragment of a story left unfinished. Her gaze landed on the wooden cabinet, the one filled with coats, scarves, shoes. She stepped closer, her hand hovering over the door. Asha, Leo warned, but she ignored him. She pulled the cabinet open and froze. It wasn't a cabinet, it was a hallway. Dark, narrow, endless. The air beyond it was thick, humming with something ancient and restless. Asha's breath came in shallow gasps. This wasn't here before, she whispered. Leo's jaw tightened. It's always been here. You've just never opened it. She turned to him. Is this the way out? His hesitation was answer enough. Asha swallowed hard. Then I have to go. Leo's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Think about this. I am thinking about it, she shot back. If I've done this before, then I need to know why. I need to know what's at the end. His fingers twitched as if he wanted to hold on, but slowly he let her go. Just remember, he murmured. Not everything wants to be remembered. Asha turned back to the dark hallway and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her. The cabin was gone. Leo was gone. All that remained was the sound of her own footsteps echoing into the void. Chapter 6. The Room at the End. The hallway stretched endlessly, the air thick with something unseen. Asha walked forward, her own breath the only sound in the suffocating silence. The further she went, the more the walls seemed to pulse, like they were breathing, or waiting. She ran her fingers along them. The wood felt wrong, too smooth, too alive. Asha swallowed hard. Not everything wants to be remembered. Leo's warning echoed in her mind, but she couldn't turn back. She had to know. After what felt like hours, or maybe seconds, the hallway ended. A single door stood before her. It looked ordinary. Simple wood, an old brass handle. Nothing about it should have felt terrifying, yet her fingers trembled as she reached for it. She turned the handle. The door swung open, and she was home. Asha blinked, heart hammering. She stood in her own apartment, small, cluttered, the faint scent of coffee still lingering in the air. The city lights flickered outside her window. A book lay open on the couch, exactly where she had left it. Her phone buzzed on the table. She stepped forward in a daze, picking it up. The screen lit up with a message. "Leo, where are you?" Her breath hitched. The walls of the apartment felt thin, like they weren't quite real. Asha's gaze darted to the window. Snow was falling. But something was wrong. The flakes weren't moving naturally. They hung in the air, frozen in place. This wasn't real. She wasn't home. Her pulse pounded. No, this isn't. Behind her, the door creaked. Slowly, she turned. Leo stood in the doorway. But something was different. His eyes were darker, his expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to open that door, Asha," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. "What is this?" He took a slow step forward. The place between remembering and forgetting. Her breath came faster. "Then I never left the cabin." Leo's gaze softened. "You never even left the train." Asha staggered back. "No, that's not." The room around her flickered. For a split second, she saw it. The train carriage, cold and empty. Her own reflection in the dark window, her body slumped against the seat. The ticket still clutched in her fingers. One way only. The truth crashed into her like a tidal wave. She had never made it off the train. She had been stuck here, in this loop, choosing to forget every time she got too close to the truth. Leo stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the last time, Asha. Choose." Her hands trembled. She could already feel it happening, her mind pulling away, blurring the edges, trying to forget. It would be so easy to fall back into the loop, to pretend this had never happened. Or, Asha sucked in a sharp breath. She clenched her fists, and she remembered. The train, the snow, the cold. The choice she had made long before she ever stepped onto that carriage. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the train was gone. The cabin was gone. And Asha stood in the middle of an empty station, a single set of footprints trailing behind her. For the first time in forever, she had finally stepped off the train. And this time, there was no going back.